CBS Sports' John Breech gave every NFL team a good thing about their schedule and a bad thing about their schedule. And on today's episode of Jags Now, presented by our wonderful friends over at Prize Picks, we're going to be discussing the Jaguars aspect of it, my initial kind of thoughts on Breech's comments, and really just going over the schedule again now that it's been out for roughly a week and really diving in to some of the advantages and disadvantages the Jaguars face for this upcoming season. So we'll get right into it here. But guys, we're providing you Jaguars content all off season long. And guess what? It's for free. Tell you what, if you guys hit that subscribe button, set a notification or a reminder on your phone to check in with a week. If we're not enjoying the content that we're putting out on the channel, you can unsubscribe and it doesn't cost you a dime. Turn on your notifications so you never miss a video here at Jags Now. All right, getting into John Breech's comments here in terms of the positive aspect. We'll start out with some good, and then we'll talk about the negative here. Here's what Breech had to say on the Jaguars' schedule. The Jags are back, baby. The Jaguars got 3 primetime games this year, which might not sound like a lot, but it is for Jacksonville. The Jags rarely get that many primetime games, and it proves that the NFL views them as a serious contender. The Jags got a Thursday night game at Baltimore, a Monday night game versus Pittsburgh, and a Sunday night game at Dallas. This could be a big year for Duuuuuuuvall. And the NFL clearly respects Jacksonville as a team. You win 13 games last year, you win your division. They are saying, hey, this isn't a fluke. We don't expect Jacksonville to be picking in the top 10 necessarily this year. Again, a lot of things can happen between now and the start of the season, but the NFL is going to put the Jaguars in more primetime slots, and I think they absolutely earned it. They had a lot of really big moments last year, whether it was the Monday Night Football game against the Kansas City Chiefs, that epic duel against the Denver Broncos Week 16 last year, among many other games. And I think the Jaguars are going to be in front of more NFL audiences this season, which is good for Jacksonville. And the fact that they got 3 primetime games is certainly a positive thing for this football team and for this fan base. So what I'm going to do is kind of break down each of those primetime games and kind of discuss, the games leading up to those primetime games for both the Jags and whoever they're facing, and just kind of give my overall thoughts. So without any further ado, let's start with the Baltimore Ravens, who their first primetime game is Week 9 on the road, Thursday Night Football. And, before the Jaguars take on the Baltimore Ravens, both teams, I'm not going to lie, are facing somewhat difficult competition. The Jaguars play a divisional game against the Indianapolis Colts. Their one home game in a really gauntlet of a stretch, which we'll talk about later in today's show. But it is a home game against the Indianapolis Colts, so a bit of an easier matchup compared to the Baltimore Ravens, who take on the Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen on the road. And this is an advantage for the Jaguars. Ultimately, going into Baltimore on the road at any point during the season is always going to be a tough task, especially on a short week. But when you're at home taking on the Indianapolis Colts, again, a divisional game, so you don't want to dismiss it completely. You kind of wish that the Baltimore Ravens, or at least you hope that they're going to have kind of a tougher opponent that could give them some lumps and some bruises. And, Baltimore's been kind of in this class in the AFC, along with Buffalo, along with Kansas City, some of the other elite teams throughout, the recent memory that, if it's Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, those two are going to put up points. It's going to be an absolute bloodbath. And for the Jaguars, this is the best case scenario if you have to face Baltimore on a short week. So I really think this is an advantage for Jacksonville. And the fact that, yes, it's not ideal. You're having to go on the road in this spot. But to get the Ravens possibly, having a absolute just barn burner of a matchup against the Buffalo Bills the week prior, that's certainly an advantage. And hopefully the Jaguars at this point are really hitting their stride as a football team. We'll talk about the other primetime games and also just my general thoughts on some of the negative comments from John Breech's, overall sentiments in his article. But we would not be able to do today's episode without our wonderful friends over at Prize Picks. Today's show is sponsored by Prize Picks, America's #1 sports picks app. Playoffs are here for basketball. Baseball is underway, and it's time to cash in with Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 sports picks app, and it's the best place to win cash while watching sports. If you're a hoops guy, you can go with points, rebounds, assists, blocks, or three-pointers. If you're more of a seam head, you can choose hits, home runs, or strikeouts. The app is really easy to use. Just pick more or less on a few player stats to lock in your lineup. I've got a season-long Prize Picks lineup that I'm feeling really confident about heading into the football season. It's $20 to win 60 here on this 2-player lineup. Give me a Emeka Egbuka to get more on his receiving yards. Mike Evans left during free agency, and I think Egbuka is only going to soar as a player next season. And Bashal Tootin for your team. I think he is going to rush the heck out of the football next season now that Travis Etienne is no longer in town. $20 to win 60 on this two-player season-long lineup. And PrizePicks gives you a lot of different options to pick daily fantasy. So make sure you do it with our friends over at PrizePicks. New user offer. Download the PrizePicks app today with the link in the comments and the description and use code HMA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Let's code HMA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. All right, getting into the second primetime matchup here. It's against the Pittsburgh Steelers on Monday Night Football. And this one is a home game, so it is beneficial to play in Duval County versus going up to Pittsburgh. Later season matchup, so it's also kind of a noteworthy, similar to the Baltimore Ravens, that all three of these Jaguars primetime games are on the back half of the season. So I do think that's noteworthy. Now, in terms of the matchups leading in for both teams, not ideal really for either one. The Steelers are hosting the Houston Texans on Sunday Night Football the week prior to taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars. And the Jaguars are on the road traveling up to Chicago for a matchup late in the year. And given the fact that Chicago is usually pretty cold this time of year, not ideal for a warm weather Jacksonville Jaguars team to take on the Chicago Bears there. I'm not really loving this spot for either team, if I'm going to be completely honest. To me, the Pittsburgh Steelers, it was announced that Aaron Rodgers is returning for this upcoming season for his last kind of hoorah. Who knows how, well they're going to fare in the AFC North next season. I mean, Baltimore, certainly, who we just talked about, is going to be a team worth reckoning. I think the Cincinnati Bengals, Joe Burrow, if they can stay healthy, adding Dexter Lawrence to that defense, they'll be a formidable team. But the Steelers still have a lot of talent, but it will be under new head coach Mike McCarthy. Going up against the Houston Texans team, who they obviously played last season, it did not end well for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm not sure it's going to be any different this time around for Pittsburgh, but if you're Jacksonville going up against Chicago, the Chicago Bears, Caleb Williams, Ben Johnson, I think they're going to only try to build off what they built last year, and they could be a sneaky team to try to come out of the NFC next year out of Chicago. So not an easy matchup for either team. However, it is a primetime slot at home on Monday Night Football, and like you said, Jacksonville really kind of announced itself last season on a Monday Night Football game against Kansas City last season, so ultimately see where both teams are at, but I do think it's going to be a tough spot for both Pittsburgh and Jacksonville. Moving on to the final primetime game next season for the Jacksonville Jaguars, and it's at the Dallas Cowboys on Sunday Night Football. And anytime you're playing the Dallas Cowboys in any primetime slot, I don't care if you're, in the XFL, for crying out loud. If you have the Dallas Cowboys on TV, people are going to watch. And certainly for the Jacksonville Jaguars, this is a big spot for them here in Week 16. And if you look at the matchups prior to that Sunday Night Football matchup, you've got a big one for Jacksonville. You're on the road at the Houston Texans, which could be a very pivotal game in terms of racing for the AFC South. Meanwhile, the Dallas Cowboys will be on the road taking on the Los Angeles Rams. And depending on how Dallas does next year, I do think they're going to be a more talented team on defense with the addition of Caleb Downs and what have you. And Dak Prescott on any given Sunday can compete with some of the best in the National Football League. However, that's not a tough draw for the Los Angeles Rams. This is a possible statement game for Jacksonville. Depending on the result between the Jaguars and the Texans, the AFC South could be kind of just up in the air at that point, whether it's a win or a loss. So, you have a moment in front of a large national audience, the Dallas Cowboys, to really make a statement in terms of hitting your stride late in the year. I thought last year going up against the Denver Broncos, I believe it was also Week 16 last year, if I'm not mistaken, the Jaguars really put themselves on the map in terms of solidifying themselves as a contender with a win on the road against Bo Nix and company. This could be kind of a similar vibe against the Dallas Cowboys. So a very possible statement game here for Jacksonville. We'll ultimately see, obviously, where teams end up here in 2026. All right, we've talked about the good. Now we need to talk about the bad. John Breech continues here about the Jaguars in terms of some negatives about their schedule. He had this to say. There will be a 2-month stretch during the season where the Jaguars only play one home game. From September 28th to November 28th, the Jaguars will only play one game in Jacksonville, and they won't play a single home game during the entire month of October. A big reason for that is because they'll be playing 2 games in London, but they also have 4 true road games during that 8-week span, including a stretch of 3 road games starting in Week 9 at Baltimore, at Tennessee, and at the Giants. Over the past 4 seasons, we've seen a total of 15 teams hit with a 3-game road trip, and they've combined to go 19-26. And I just kind of wanted to visually show you guys the Jaguars' quote-unquote road trip that they've got during the peak of their season. And it starts in week 4, traveling on the road against Cincinnati Bengals, who I think they're going to be an improved team this year. If Joe Burrow and company can stay healthy, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Chase Brown, that offense is going to be able to put up points. And the fact that they've really made an attempt these last couple of drafts to add to their defense, they obviously made that big trade for Dexter Lawrence from the Giants, they're going to be an improved team. You then have those back-to-back London games, which counts as kind of quote-unquote home games, both in London because the Jaguars are going through renovations on their stadiums for their upcoming season. So the NFL kind of did them a solid in terms of, hey, they were eventually going to have to do this, play 2 games in London. Why not make it this year when you're already at limited capacity? Nonetheless, they're home games, but they're not really home games. They're on the road in London overseas against both the Eagles and Texans. Then you have the Week 7 bye, which, again, is solid, but then you play your one home game in this stretch against the Indianapolis Colts. It's a divisional game before, as Breech mentioned, going 3 straight road games against the Baltimore Ravens, the Tennessee Titans, and the New York Giants. We'll kind of break this down in more kind of thoughts here in terms of why I think this is such a disadvantage for Jacksonville. Not that it's, something you can't overcome, but just kind of overall highlighting it for you guys. But again, we wouldn't be able to do this show without our second sponsor of the day, and I'm proud to say we're sponsored by SeatGeek. Today's show is made possible by SeatGeek. Use code CHAT10 to get 10% off your next set of tickets. MLB is in full swing, and the NBA and NHL playoffs are here, and you can now get World Cup tickets on SeatGeek. The NFL schedule is officially released, and SeatGeek is the best place to go if you want tickets to a Jaguars game this year. I will personally be breaking out Jaguars games here at the Chat Sports Studios. But if you guys want to watch the Jacksonville Jaguars play in person, I highly recommend you do it with our friends over at SeatGeek. The Jaguars take on both the Eagles and Texans overseas in London. But to kick off Jacksonville's season, the Jaguars take on the Browns at home, and you can get tickets with SeatGeek for as low as $161. Whether it's a ball game, concert, or any other event, SeatGeek is the place to go as they have your back when purchasing tickets. Each ticket is rated on a scale of 1 to 10, so you know you're going to get a good deal. Look for the green dots as they usually mean you're getting a good deal. Red generally means you're getting a bad deal. Use code CHAT10 for 10% off your next set of tickets at SeatGeek. That's 10% off any tickets with promo code CHAT10. Make sure you click the link in the description to download the app and have the code automatically added to your account so you can use it later. Thank you, SeatGeek. This was expected, as I kind of alluded to before we had to talk about our friends over there at SeatGeek. Still not ideal for Jacksonville, right? To kind of go through, a 2-month period where you're only at home for one game. And, this is one of those things where if you're Jacksonville, you're trying to build off momentum, right? One of the things that I think is underrated from an NFL team's perspective, because there's so much parity in NFL, right? Like, you're always trying to give teams that finish in last place a leg up in terms of having a chance to compete next season, right, while playing a fourth-place schedule versus a first-place schedule. Obviously, when you finish lower in the standings, you have a higher chance of getting a higher draft pick. So the NFL is very much about parity. So if you can have sustained success, in other words, winning games, 10-plus games, multiple seasons in a row, like the Kansas City Chiefs really before last season, like the Buffalo Bills, like the Philadelphia Eagles who have won so many games in the past, the teams that when you see them, right, that when you win games consistently, you're trying to create that in Jacksonville. So you had the season last year where you really brought out the gates, first-year head coach with quarterback Trevor Lawrence, who played some of his best ball in his career. It's not ideal to go into that second year of a campaign where you only have one true home game in 2 months. That being said, it was all kind of expected. And one thing that I wanted to dive into deeper in terms of the actual road games is, again, subject to change. We're not at the point in the season where we can really break down these games in depth, but the odds for the road games that you're having to face these teams, you're only favored in 2 of them. You're a 2.5-point underdog against the Cincinnati Bengals, a 2.5-point underdog against the Philadelphia Eagles, a 1.5-point underdog against the Houston Texans, and a 4.5-point dog against the Baltimore Ravens, which, you could debate, should the Jaguars be, favored in any of those games? We'll ultimately wait and see again. Once we get to those actual points in the season, you can make the debate. But the Tennessee Titans, the game, and the Giants, the 2 games that you are favored, Titans, that's a divisional game with Robert Saleh. I expect them to be a better version of themselves this year. And the New York Giants, after bringing in John Harbaugh, another year for Jackson Dart to develop, they're not going to be an easy out. So this is not an easy stretch for Jacksonville either. Like, those are 6 legitimate teams that could compete with the NFL's best on any given Sunday. And make no mistake, this is a season-defining stretch because, if you're sitting there in your Jacksonville, right, we'll go over the whole schedule here in just a moment. a lot of teams, you're going to have to win on the road if you want to succeed in the National Football League. That stretch right there in the middle where you're having to really battle test yourself and really play against the elements. If you tell me the Jaguars are going 3-3 in that stretch, I think you kind of take it, right? Because again, you're not facing easy competition. You're not at home. You're, for two of those games overseas. Granted, one of those you'll have at least a week over in England before you play that second game against the Houston Texans. So you can play that as a benefit, but it's not going to be easy. And I think for Jacksonville, you really have to take advantage of those road games and really try to see if you can at least split if you're hoping to not only repeat as AFC South champions, but also hope to look to compete in the AFC as a whole. So looking back at the schedule here for 2026, I think if you're Jacksonville, you hope to take care of business week 1 against the Browns. Whether they start Deshaun Watson, whether they start Shedeur Sanders, whatever the case may be, you hope to win that one. I think you need to try to split either Denver or New England, so at least you sit there at 2-1 through 3 weeks before you go on this massive road stretch. Now, you take on the Bengals, you take on the Eagles and Texans. If you get through, the first 6 weeks, which again, it's not easy. I mean, your easiest game through that stretch is easily the Cleveland Browns. If you get through this stretch, say at 3-3, dare I say 4-2, you're really sitting pretty because you take on the Colts at home. You hopefully should be able to win that game before traveling to Baltimore in Week 9 and a tough 3-game road stretch. You go 2-1 in that stretch, you hope, and then it sets up kind of easier down in the back half of the schedule where the Chicago Bears game won't be easy, and then you're on the road against the Houston Texans. Dallas is not an easy opponent, but I think the Tennessee Titans, you hopefully should beat them at home. Pittsburgh on Monday Night Football, I'm not sure how well they're going to be playing this year. In Aaron Rodgers' final season, we'll see kind of where they sit later in the year. And then the Commanders, I'm not necessarily as high on them in Week 17. So really, if you can take care of that middle part of the season between Weeks 4 and Weeks 11, it really sets you up for a great second half of the season and hopefully another AFC South title for Jacksonville. But I want to hear from you guys. I just broke down the entire schedule from my perspective. What do you think is the toughest game on the Jaguars schedule? To me, even though the Ravens take on the Buffalo Bills in Week 8 prior to Thursday Night Football, I think short week against Baltimore is easily the toughest game in my personal opinion, but I want to hear your guys' opinion down in the comments section. And that'll conclude this episode of Jags Now presented by Chat Sports. Thank you so much for tuning in. We will have you covered throughout the entire offseason, so make sure you subscribe and turn on your notifications.